Folks, welcome again. This is another session where we go deep into a topic. We don't necessarily have all the answers, but we are committed to the exploration of questions that needs to have and hard conversation. And so we're in this other soul session. We're talking about vulnerability, and I want to introduce my guest today. I've known him for a couple of years now, and he's just been an amazing presence in the industry. So I'm going to turn over to Mark, have him introduce himself and share a little bit more about his background and why he's here today. Mark.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'll do a quick version of what I'm up to right now and a little bit about my background. And then yeah, we can get this conversation going. And so my background's primarily sales. Right now, I'm running sales development for the Americas for a company called Eptura. We're in the work tech space. I also run a small SMB AE team. So my uh, team, I guess, has diversified a little bit, and now it's multidisciplinary, so that keeps me busy. But the conversation today, I'm pumped for it. Vulnerability is one of those interesting things where I don't know if it's actually a skill set or not, more so than it is just being aware of it. But it is a game changer and a differentiator when you sort of lean into it. And I know it's not something that I hear talked about a lot. And so yeah, I think I'm excited for the conversation, and I think it's a topic that is always worth covering and worth listening to.
I love that. Thank you, Mark. I actually didn't realize, but I know it's like, having working with AEs and SDRs, I think you have an interesting background to talk about. I'm sure you've worked with global teams as well, because we always think about like what does work relationship look like in different countries and geo areas. One of the
Yeah.
questions that came up for me was around this, like, how would we define, or even not saying we are going to be the Oxford Dictionary today, but if I was a new manager and you were teaching me about vulnerability, how would you even start to define it in your own words?
Yeah, that's a good. I appreciate you prefacing with like, "Hey, take this is we're gonna take our best stab at it." But my perspective is that vulnerability is it means having the courage to show up authentically, even if there's risk involved. And I think that is what makes it so difficult to do. Like, I think leaders are scrutinized often to have all of the answers, but one of the most powerful things you can do is be willing to admit that you don't have all of the answers without fear that your credibility will be damaged. Um, and like that is a tough concept to grasp,
Yeah,
and it's even tougher to do in practice. But I would think that sort of like covers it for me.
yeah. The two words that dropped out that stood out to me, the courage, I think is interesting. Of like, there's courage and then there's risk, and I think it's weirdly two sides of the same coin, right? Like, you need courage to have risk, and in itself, vulnerability takes a lot of risk because it's also about like how you will be perceived. Um, I can imagine being a leader for as long as you have. You've had areas where maybe you've done it right, maybe you've done it wrong. I will start off like, how does it show up for you today? Like, just maybe in the last month you've had to do share a vulnerable moment. How does that show up for you today? I want to start there.
Yeah, I was mentioning before we got on the call that I'm going through a little bit of a hiring spree right now, and so we just brought on 3 new SDRs, and I think whenever you're building a new relationship, right, like the ones that we build when we hire new folks, a big part of that is sort of like crystallizing the foundation of trust. And I think it's difficult to do that unless you're sort of like leaning with vulnerability. And
Mm,
so most recently, like that's been part of our conversations, especially as we start to get into more of a regular one-on-one rhythm, has been setting the tone around like this is a safe space for you. It's also a safe space for
mhm,
me.
mhm.
Whatever we talk about in here stays in here, and you know, I'll be confident to share
Yeah.
things with you, and I hope you do the same for me. Um, so that's been probably like my most recent example, as you were talking, I was thinking about just like the comfort level of wanting to lead with vulnerability and knowing the value and the impact, and when that actually started for me. And I'm realizing as we're talking about it that I've been blessed to be
Mm.
around some really talented leaders that sort of like showed me the way and let me know that it's okay to do it. One of the first times I saw it, I don't think she would have a problem with me using her name or shouting her out, but her name's Kristen Agnelli. I was working for a company called Aptian at the time, and she was running global demand gen. And she was one of the first leaders that I saw just like brings her whole self to work, like super
Yeah.
transparent, really big on over communicating. And really what it did is, one, we rode way harder for her at that
Mm,
particular time. So it almost like pulled us in and made us feel much more connected to the mission, to her, to her goals and objectives. And so it was
yeah,
one of the first times I remember just like recognizing that is powerful, and
yeah.
it's imprinted on me as a leader since then.
I love that. And I guess the opposite, right? Because I think a lot of us have the assumption that, like, or I've worked in areas where I had leaders struggle to say, I don't know, or they felt like they had to be someone that they're not. Was there an assumption before that of what work should be? Or was it just, that was that the first time were you asking for that? Or did she just blew your mind open to a world that you didn't even know that was possible before?
That part, yeah, that was just her. That was just, and I don't know. And you know what? Like, if I gotta call Kristen and ask her now if that's something that she was trained on, or that like she
Mm,
recognizes part of her leadership journey, or if that's just how she is, and I've just been a benefactor of it. But yeah, my take was that she she will always give you who she is, no
yeah,
sugarcoating, right? And you always get Kristen. Um, and yeah, like I've mentioned before, like I don't think that's a skill. I think that's just like
yeah,
something you're
yeah.
intentional about.
Is the thing that you mentioned that was an unintentional consequences, but I don't think a lot of leaders talk about is like, how do you get your team to go right for you? And maybe she was doing it intentionally, but you guys got it. And it was like, wow, like she's telling us the real thing. We can go to bat for her. Can leaders get that buy-in from their team without a level of vulnerability? I know it's
I
not an
don't
easy question.
I don't think so, right? I think you to to drive anything, I think requires a level of transparency, and people I think they crave that, right? I think they crave a little bit of like, you respect me enough to give me just like very candid
Yeah,
conversation and very candid feedback, especially in our world, right? In the sales
yeah,
development landscape, it's high velocity, right? And things change fast. And as the business changes, the expectation is you adjust with it. And if you don't, it's going to be challenging. And so, unfortunately, sometimes you have to have your team pivot unexpectedly, right? Or change a process that they just got settled with. I think without leading with transparency or some sort of vulnerability
yeah,
where it's like, hey, I don't love this, but we need to do it. I,
yeah,
I think it's hard for them to get on board without knowing where you actually stand.
yeah. One of the like there are times for me where I've had to be the most vulnerable, whether it's I got a goal that I have to chase that candidly I might not have had all my hands in the pie, of fit setting that goal or having to let people go. Like honestly, like no one likes to do that, man. That
Hmm.
sucks. But there's a way to do it in grace. Are there other times or pivotal moments where for us on the jobs where we've had to be, we've had to have those conversations? And I think about that a lot, being anywhere, even senior leadership, middle management. Like you're almost like caught between two worlds. Like you're
Yeah.
serving different orders. I think there's even more need for vulnerability when you almost have two managers, if that makes sense. Like you have your reps, but you also have the folks above you. Are there any other
Mhm.
scenarios that you're thinking about that like tends to come about more often than not?
Yeah. The one that I think comes up, especially as it relates to vulnerability, and you sort of alluded to it, is the conversations where you have to deliver bad news, or you have to deliver something that is not in line with either someone's expectations, or just like news that they weren't hoping to get. And I think especially in the sales development world, it's around career progression and career
Mm,
opportunity, right? Typically we're hiring folks who are super motivated, fire in the belly, very hungry, looking to grow their careers, and they tend to want to run towards that career growth as fast as humanly possible. And a lot of times prior to them being ready, and we kind of have to reset their expectations. But the other side of that coin is unfortunately sometimes when folks get like a little long in the tooth for the role, however there's nowhere for them to grow, or they interview for something internally and unfortunately they don't get it, right? And maybe an external candidate comes in. those are really difficult conversations to have because their expectation is now meeting their reality. And I think moments where you have to be vulnerable around like, hey, this wasn't the ideal outcome that we were hoping for, but we're going to go gather some feedback and figure out where we were gapped and run
Mhm.
towards those gaps so that this never happens again. And I know you're bummed, I'm bummed, but we can learn from this and grow from this, and
Yeah,
that's my
yeah.
commitment to you.
That's really helpful. I've last two questions. One of the thoughts I was having around is performative vulnerability, where I do see a lot of people say stuff like, "Oh, it's a vulnerable moment," and it becomes this like word we use. But
Mm,
inherently, in my head, true vulnerability has a level of risk that I'm sharing something, I'm saying something that there's a world that this might go south.
yeah,
Right? Like I'm going to share something with you, or I'm going to show you some numbers, or I'm going to have this conversation, and I'm hoping for the best, but like there's a risk that this might go south. Do you tend to see that, or are you, I don't know, in your career, like where a lot of leaders tend to try to do more of a performative vulnerability and versus true vulnerability?
yeah.
And how's that maybe affected you, or what advice would you give to someone if they're in that scenario?
I think people are smart enough to sniff that sort of stuff
Mm,
out, and where it may come off as disingenuous. And so I think the impact that has is that sometimes that can be damaging from a brand or credibility standpoint. And so like my advice would be don't do that, right? Like if you're gonna
mhm,
say something and you want it to be authentic, then like your your delivery and your audience should feel that from you, right? And if they
yeah,
don't, then maybe it wasn't as authentic as as you thought it might be.
yeah,
But the other thing is like your relationship with people vary, right? You might be closer to some than others, and you have to be conscious of that when you think of just how you communicate and what you're communicating. Sometimes people that you're communicating with, it's not a safe space, and you have to be conscious of that.
yeah,
I just got a new, well, I guess not just, but I got a new boss in May, and like we're building the relation May June timeframe, and we're building the relationship, and like he is very open and a very
mhm,
straight shooter, and like very transparent about his goals and very transparent about how he wants your goals to be a part of his goal. And so very quickly I have this sense of commitment to him, and I have this sense of
mhm,
of just sort of like ownership around our mutual goals and making sure that he's set up for success. And so I don't he's probably a good example too. His name's Sean
yeah,
Turner. He's a good example too of like this sort of style matters because it can build things much faster, um,
yeah.
just based on that.
Yeah. Okay. And the last one, oh, you just timed so perfectly, right? The last question I had was around, if you think about it, you've had really great examples of people who've been truly vulnerable and open the space for you and allow you to step up and go to bat for them, right? There are people out there who were not in that scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess if you were to give them a three step, it doesn't have to be three steps, but if we want to make it very concrete of what steps might they take to start to build this relationship, whether it's their manager or their direct reports. I'm curious, like, what are some very concrete steps they can take if they're like, this is something that I want, this is something that I've heard about, I've never really had, and I don't have like the great mentors that you've had, but I want to do it. How might they even start from day one? Start to think about this, start to implement this on their team.
Yeah, I it probably step one, I guess it starts with the conversation itself of
Mm,
outlining, here's what's important to me, here's what I'm feeling, whether it's good or bad, or here's what I'm longing for. I think that is probably step one, and assuming that conversation is met with some sort of positive reception, which like you hope it is. I think step two is about sort of like defining what that looks like between the two of you, or between the group, so that you're progressing in like directionally, uh some sort of like productive
yeah.
direction. But then the third thing, I guess, is like assuming you don't get that sort of like positive reception. I think you have to be comfortable sort of like
Mm,
trying to find those resources externally, right? Because just because you can't get it at the company that you're at right now,
mm,
it doesn't mean that those resources aren't out there. It just means that like
yeah,
you maybe have to take one more step of initiative to find
yeah,
that stuff, because it certainly is. And if you don't find anyone, I'm happy to be that
yeah.
person. Let's give back. We'll do it.
Awesome, Mark. This has been great. I have so much more to ask, but we want to keep these very action packed. Thank you for sharing the stories. Where can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing, even if they wanted to share a moment of vulnerability with you?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the only Mark Mangal that I know of. Last name Mangal. And so yeah, hit me there. My inbox is open, and yeah, like I love talking shop with other leaders. I'm trying to learn as much as I can. The journey's far from over, and so yeah, there's a lot to do, and we're we're trying to get after it.
Amazing. We'll link to that. Mark, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you. Thanks for having me.